I was getting used to tabbing things. That's a satisfying noise. I don't know what possessed me to pick up War and Peace. The same thing could have been accomplished if I had been like, I'm going to work on math problems. Hi, how's it going? My name is Ashley. Welcome back to my channel. My mindset in 2020 towards classical literature changed dramatically, and we're here to discuss why that is. So, last year, Lucy the Reader, if you don't know her, I'll leave the links down below. She hosted a year-long readathon with a challenge to read more classics. And I was deeply fascinated by this challenge because I want to be well-read. See my video up here if you want more information about my mindset and thoughts on that. But I decided to take this challenge on. Now, this readathon is made to be tailored to you. Whatever you think counts as a classic counts as a classic, because it's debated what's classic and what's not. So whatever you think is a classic, that's a classic. Whatever language you read it in, also fine. And the challenge is just to read more classics, but if in default you don't have anything you want to come up with, the challenge is to read one book a month, one classic a month, for a total of 12 classics in the year. Now, me being a little naive or perfectionistic or having way too big of expectations for myself, I just took on the entire challenge without tailoring it at all. Meaning I went, yeah, I could read a classic a month. That's no big deal. It's fine. It's no big deal. And I don't know, but I mean, along the way, I had a major shift in the way that I read in general, but especially the way I read classics. And I'm going to walk you through that journey as I walk you through the books that I read in 2020. So this is my Classics Community 2020 Reading Challenge wrap-up. It's a mouthful. So the first classic that I read last year was the Odyssey, which is attributed to Homer. And I hated this book so much. I hated every second of it. I could not stay awake. This put me to sleep every moment of the day. I tabbed everything, but I was getting used to tabbing things. That's a satisfying noise. I am familiar with the story of the Odyssey, but I just did not enjoy this book at all. And I've said for most of the year of 2020 that I hated this book. And I think I'm wrong. I've revised my opinion, and we'll get to why. But not to be deterred, after finishing the Odyssey, barely finishing it within the month of January, I was like, okay, we got through book one. Let's continue on. So for the month of February, I picked up The Great Gatsby. This was my first read through of The Great Gatsby. I thought the writing was beautiful, but I had no idea what was going on. And I didn't really do a close read. I was just mostly reading to finish the challenge. So I got to the end of it and I went, I don't know why everybody cares about this book. This book is weird. Is weird. But I was really pleased with myself because I finished it in 3 days, and I was like, yeah, sweet, I got 3 weeks before I have to read any more classics. Like, this is great. I'm doing great on my challenge. In that exact terminology, before I have to, which probably, like, that should have been a red flag. But it wasn't. Anyway, my opinion of The Great Gatsby was I was feeling indifferent towards it, and I probably would never pick it up again. I don't know what possessed me to pick up War and Peace. I mean, there was a buddy read going on in the Classics Community Goodreads group, and they were like, yeah, let's get together and let's read this book in 3 months. And they set up a schedule that ended up being like 20 pages a day, and I was like, oh, I could do 20 pages a day, like, that's not bad at all. And like, we'll just make up for it later in the year, because I mean, we'll have read this and then we'll just pick a couple short classics and we'll still get done. Like, we'll still have 12 classics in a year, and like, this is on everybody's list of being well read, so like, let's do it. Like, let's do it. And I could not. This book is 1,300 pages, and I couldn't do it. Probably because 20 pages in War and Peace probably is equivalent to 90 to 100 pages in a work of modern fiction for me. So like, if I were to read 90 pages of Harry Potter, for example, it would be about the equivalent time spent reading 20 pages of War and Peace. And I just had to slow down. And not just slow down, I had to crawl through this book. and it was infuriating to begin with, because the first 200 pages of War and Peace are probably the hardest, and a lot of people say that because you're getting used to the world building, you're getting used to the setting, you're getting used to the characters, you're getting used to the way he writes, and I couldn't rush it because I was missing things. Like, I couldn't even get the main plot, which is why I knew I had to slow down, because normally I'll read fast enough, so fast that I am at least getting the plot down. But I couldn't do that because the plot was so interwoven and I was missing all these crucial, important things. So I decided to read it in the background. I took off the pressure of trying to finish it with the group, and I just kept it on my bedside table as something that I was working on very slowly. And that turned out to be one of the best choices I've made in a long time, because this became my insomnia book for a while. I knew that if I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning, I could read 40 to 50 pages, and I would spend 2.5 to 3 hours reading, and I would fall asleep, because something about me trying to puzzle out the narrative and devote my attention to trying to figure out what was going on would help calm the anxieties and help me so that I could sleep. And I discovered that classics actually work really well for me with that fact. They are really good insomnia books for me. I don't know if that works for everybody, and I don't mean to, that sounds like an insult to just be like, yeah, just read it and it'll put you right to sleep, because that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it helped me devote, it helped me turn the logical functioning part of my brain back on, so that way when I was struggling with anxieties, especially with the things that were going on in my life, I could say, I just need to check out and focus on something. I think the same thing could have been accomplished if I had been like, I'm going to work on math problems and solve them. But I'm not going to do math problems at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to read books. So that's what happened. And when I finally finished this book, I didn't know what to think. I remember reading an article, and it's been so long now I don't know that I could find the article again, but it was about a man who was reading War and Peace on the train, and an elderly gentleman stopped and was like, oh, are you reading War and Peace? Like, what do you think about it? And he was like, yeah, like, it's okay, it's really long. And the elderly gentleman was like, yeah, that's what I thought the first time I read it. I mean, I've read it 9 times now, and it just gets so much better every time you read it. And I was like, what the crap, dude? Like, how do you read this book 9 times? Do you see how big this book is? And the narrator in this article was thinking the same thing. He was like, well, okay, thanks for bragging. Bye. And then the narrator proceeded to finish his article by saying, you know, I finished this book and I understand. Like, I get it. I understand why you would read this book again. And I naively was like, no, I'm going to read this book once and get my bragging rights, and then I'm going to be done. Not so. I will get to that, because I realized I had spent 6 months with these characters. I had devoted probably thousands, maybe not thousands. Thousands is maybe an exaggeration. Maybe 1,000, hundreds. We'll go with hundreds. I have devoted hundreds of hours to reading this book and getting to know these characters. And from a more zoned out perspective, I haven't spent that much time with a lot of characters before, except for maybe Harry Potter, because I've read that series so many times. And I've gotten to know these characters really well, and I got really attached to them, and I really cared what happened to them because I was spending so much time and energy into them. I realized that I don't develop that kind of attachment to characters as much anymore, because I'm trying to get through things at breakneck speed, because I feel like that makes me more valuable. But it happens at the expense of me truly understanding the novel and the character development. And I realized that the reason I probably reread books so much is because I'm missing all the important details because I'm reading too quickly. So the next book that I finished, moving on, we'll get back to this, is Dracula. I got off to such a rocky start, but ended up really enjoying this novel. But not just the novel itself, the process of reading this novel, which is really key. I'm a perfectionist, and I'm ambitious in just about every aspect of my life, and I try to go above and beyond excessively. Like, oh, War and Peace will make me well-read, so I'm going to read it in a month. Or, you need that project turned in 2 weeks, well, I'm going to do it in 5 days instead of 2 weeks. But there's always another deadline, and mostly it just means that I'm running myself ragged, and I don't enjoy the process or the final product. And for me, at least, reading has always been about the final product and not the process of reading, and I started to switch that up about September, October of this year. which brings us to The Count of Monte Cristo. Ta-da! This book tore my soul to pieces. I loved this book, and I don't know, I can't talk enough about this book. It was really easy to read this book. Like, if you're looking to get into classics, Alexander Dumas is a great jump into it because the narrative is really easy to follow and it's pretty easy to read. I found myself reading upwards of like 50 pages in one sitting. I immersed myself in this world. I studied commentaries. I wanted to know what was going on in the plot. I sticky tabbed everything because I thought that was fun. I followed Dante with such hope and such dread. I watched the movie adaptation. The movie adaptation was garbage, but I still watched it and I was excited to watch it. And I read this novel pretty slowly on purpose when I felt like it, and it took me 5 months to get through this novel. And the thing is, I wouldn't trade that time away. Like, normal reading, I probably could have finished 15 to 20 books if I had not been reading The Count of Monte Cristo and I'd been spending as much time reading other novels, especially more modern novels. But I wouldn't trade this experience of reading this book away for the ability to say that I'd finished 15 or 20 more novels, or even 15 or 20 classics. I was at work and I mentioned to somebody that I just finished The Count of Monte Cristo, and they're like, oh yeah, I just finished listening to that on audiobook too. And I was like, oh cool, well, like, let's have a conversation because I love this book. And he had listened to this book in 5 days, and he'd listened to it at 2.0 speed, which I don't even know how you understand somebody when they're on 2.0 speed, like 2 times as fast as a normal human should be speaking or listening. Anyway, and I mean, which I just want to clarify. If your goal is to finish as many books as you humanly can, this is a great way to accomplish that goal. Or the problem came when I tried to talk with him about the character development of the main character, Edmond Dantes, and how, like, the parts of the novel that I thought were most impactful were how his acts of revenge challenged and then changed him. But it quickly became clear that my coworker didn't really remember these moments, and there were things that I thought were key to the novel and the character growth and development that he didn't even remember. And I jokingly told him that he'd missed the ending, and he was like, well, that's what the reread is for. Like, the first time through is just for plot. And I have thought about that moment so much since, because I saw myself clearly for the first time. And it's totally fine if you want to finish books as fast as possible. I'm not saying you can't, but for me, in my entire life up until August of last year was spent just reading the plot the first time through and then rereading it, and it was a completely different novel because I was catching all of the nuances, all of the character. It was just a completely different novel. And suddenly I realized that I had an experience that was out of my realm of normality, my realm of expertise. The Count of Monte Cristo had a huge impact on me and how I view the world, and it hadn't on my coworker, which is fine. It doesn't have to have an impact on him. Not every book you read is going to have an impact on you. But it made me wonder just how many books I've read that haven't had an impact on me because I read them too quickly, because I didn't give myself the actual chance to experience the world. And it's the joy of reading that I have lost in my desire to read as many things as possible. And this experience carried over into the next 2 books that I read because I wanted to read them because I was curious about them and I was curious about the world. And I don't pick up classics because I'm curious about them. Like, that has just never happened. I pick up classics because I feel I have to in order to be truly educated, whatever that means. So I read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, not once, but twice. And I really enjoyed the experience of reading this. This is not Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This is a collaboration of all of Robert Louis Stevenson. It's like 78 pages. I don't even know if you can see the sticky tabs. There we go. And the last book that I read, just because why not, was The Scarlet Pimpernel. And I listened to this and read it back and forth depending on whether I was at work or whether I was at home. And I really enjoyed this book. I've read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and The Scarlet Pimpernel before when I was in high school, and I was like, they're okay. But now I love them because I spent a lot of time immersed in this world. So who cares? Like, why does this story matter? I read 7 classics. Objectively, I failed at my goal of reading 12 classics in the year of 2020. Well, I mean, I guess you could say 8 because I read Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde twice. So 8, if we want to get technical. Subjectively, though, I don't think I failed because I deeply enjoyed the last 4 books on my list. One of them I read twice, Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde, for crying out loud, and I am excited to read classics now. I mean, let me say that again. I'm excited to read classics. Like, who am I? What is this? It doesn't feel like a burden to look at these books and try and get through them. Like, this stopped being a to-do list for me, and it started to be a list of potential, of fun things and worlds to dive into. And I can't even express how mind-boggling that is because I don't have to make myself read classics anymore. Like, it's something that I'm genuinely interested in, and if I'm not in the mood for it, I'll set it aside knowing that I will be in the mood for it later. And I definitely plan to reread the Odyssey and the Great Gatsby again with this new mindset to give them a fair chance. Because I don't think it was the book's fault that I hated it. I think it was the experience that I gave it while reading it. And not only the Odyssey and the Great Gatsby, I also plan to read The Count of Monte Cristo again. I already want to read it again, and I only finished it a month and a half ago, and absolutely I plan on reading War and Peace again. Like, that's so psycho. But if you only read a book once, yes, you've read it, but did you really read it? Like, this reminds me of a conversation I heard, or an article that I read by Shannon Hill, who's the author of The Princess Academy. She had just finished The Goose Girl, and someone was interviewing her and said that she was talking with one of her readers, and the reader was like, yeah, I finished your book in 3 hours. It was fantastic. And she was taken aback by that and a little offended because she'd spent 3 years putting this book together and crafting it and shaping it, trying to tease out the message, and then someone had taken all of her work and her care in crafting this beautiful pie and just eaten it whole in one bite. And instead of savoring the craft and the flavor and the texture, they just swallowed it whole and didn't really enjoy it. They didn't take their time with it. And she was like that was a lot of work, and they just totally disregarded it in a 3-hour chunk of time and were like, okay, what's next? And I've been thinking a lot about that because I've been swallowing books whole without savoring anything of the world. And now I've started to savor the texture, and I absolutely want to eat another one of this exact same pie again. Like, I don't know if this analogy is working. But, like, I loved The Count of Monte Cristo, and I want another piece of The Count of Monte Cristo. And that's why somebody has read War and Peace 9 times, is because they like the savor and the texture of that novel. So, things that I learned from my reading classics in the year 2020. 1, I will not be setting up a page count for how much I have to read, because that just destroys my enjoyment of the book. 2, I'm not going to set a goal as to when I have to finish this book. Again, it's a made-up deadline, so I can move on to another book, and I want to be fully immersed in the book that I'm currently in. 3, I will use SparkNotes and YouTube videos to help me make sure I'm not missing major plot points, and to help explain things that I'm confused about. And 4, I will read slowly with warm blankets and warm tea if I feel like it, and sticky tabs, and I'll look up words that I don't know, but that's because that's fun to me. I plan to be a very different reader in the year 2021 than I was at the beginning of 2020, because I'm a different person. I'm much more aware now from this experience of how much my perfectionism is actually ruining my enjoyment of my own life. I'm doing the classic community challenge for 2021 again, and that video will be up soon, and instead of feeling like something is hanging over my head and I have to get these things done, it doesn't feel daunting. It feels amusing and wonderful. Anyway, there's so much to love about the process of reading, and I'm rediscovering that journey before destination, as the Knights Radiant would say. Anyway, that is the summary of my experience for this year. If you have any comments and thoughts, let me know down below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye!